The reception-room of the celebrated Petersburg lawyer was full of people when Alexey Alexandrovitch entered it. 3 ladies, one old, another young, and a merchant's wife. 3 men, a German banker with a ring on his hand, a merchant with a beard, and a sullen-looking official in undress uniform, with a decoration around his neck, had apparently been waiting a long time. 2 clerks were writing with scratching pens. Their writing utensils, and Alexey Alexandrovitch was a connoisseur of such things, were of unusual excellence. Alexey could not fail to take note of that fact. One of the clerks turned his head with an air of annoyance toward the newcomer, and, without rising, asked him with half-closed eyes, "What do you want?" "I have business with the lawyer." "He is busy," replied the clerk, severely, pointing with his pen toward those who were already waiting, and he went back to his writing. "Will he not find a moment to receive me?" asked Alexey Alexandrovitch. "He is not at liberty a single moment. He is always busy. Have the goodness to wait." "Be so good as to give him my card," said Alexey Alexandrovitch with dignity, seeing that it was impossible to preserve his incognito. The secretary took his card and, evidently not approving of it, left the room. Alexey Alexandrovitch, on principle, approved of public courts, but he did not fully sympathize with certain details of its application in Russia because of his acquaintance with its working in the best official relations, and he criticized them as far as he could criticize anything that received the sanction of the supreme power. His whole life was spent in administrative activity, and consequently, when he did not sympathize with anything, his lack of sympathy was modified by his recognition of the fact that errors were unavoidable, but that some things might be remedied. In the new judicial arrangement he did not approve of the conditions in which the lawyers were placed. Hitherto he had not had occasion to deal with lawyers, and so he had disapproved of the system only theoretically. But now his disapprobation was greatly increased by the disagreeable impression made on him in the lawyer's reception-room. "The lawyer will be out immediately," said the clerk, and in reality in about 2 minutes the door opened, and the lawyer appeared, together with a tall justice of the peace. The lawyer was a short, thick-set man with a bald head, a dark reddish beard, a prominent forehead, and long, shiny eyebrows. His dress, from his necktie and double watch-chain down to his polished boots, was that of a dandy. His face was intelligent but vulgar, his manner pretentious and in bad taste. "Be so good as to walk in," said he, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch, and gloomily ushering him into the next room, he closed the door. "Will you not sit?" He pointed to an arm-chair near his desk covered with papers, and rubbing his short, hairy hands together, he settled himself in front of the desk and bent his head to one side. But he was hardly seated when a moth-miller flew on the table, and the little man, with unexpected liveliness, caught it on the wing. Then he quickly resumed his former attitude. "Before beginning to explain my business," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, following the movements of the lawyer with astonishment, "I must inform you that the subject which brings me here is to be kept secret." An imperceptible smile slightly moved the lawyer's projecting reddish mustache. "If I were not capable of keeping the secrets entrusted to me, I should not be a lawyer," said he. "But if you wish to be assured—" Alexey Alexandrovitch glanced at him and noticed that his gray eyes, full of intelligence, had apparently read all that he had to tell. "Do you know my name?" asked Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I know you, and how valuable," here again he caught a miller, "your services are, as every Russian does," replied the lawyer, bowing. Alexey Alexandrovitch sighed. With difficulty he brought himself to speak, but when he had once begun he continued unhesitatingly in a clear, sharp voice, emphasizing certain words. "I have the misfortune to be a deceived husband. I wish to obtain legal separation from my wife, that is, a divorce, and, above all, to separate my son from his mother." The lawyer's gray eyes did their best to remain serious, but they danced with unrestrained delight, and Alexey Alexandrovitch saw that they were full of an amusement not caused solely by the prospect of a good suit. They shone with enthusiasm, with triumph, something like the brilliancy he had noticed in his wife's eyes. "You wish my assistance to obtain the divorce?" "Yes, exactly. But I must warn you that I run the risk of wasting your time. I have come only to ask preliminary advice. I wish a divorce, but for me certain forms are essential in which it is possible. Very possibly I shall give up the idea of any legal attempt if these forms do not coincide with my requirements." "Oh, that is always the way," said the lawyer. "You will always remain perfectly free." The little man, that he might not offend his client by the delight which his face ill concealed, fixed his eyes on Alexey Alexandrovitch's feet. He saw a moth flying in front of his nose, and he put out his hand, but he restrained himself, out of respect to Alexey Alexandrovitch's situation. "The general features of the laws of divorce are well known to me," continued Alexey Alexandrovitch, "but I should like to have a general knowledge of the formalities which are employed in the practical settlement of affairs of this kind." "You wish," replied the lawyer, not raising his eyes and entering with no little satisfaction into the spirit of his client's words, "you wish me to expound for you the way whereby your wishes may be fulfilled." And, as Alexey Alexandrovitch assented with an inclination of his head, he continued, casting a furtive glance now and then at his face, which was flushed with red spots. "Divorce, according to our laws," said he, with a slight shade of disdain for our laws, "is possible, as you know, in the following cases." "Let them wait!" he cried, seeing his clerk open the door. However, he rose, went to say a few words to him, came back, and sat down again. "In the following cases. Physical defect of one of the parties. Next, the unexplained absence of one of them for 5 years." In making this enumeration he bent his short hairy fingers one after another. "And finally, adultery." This word he pronounced with evident satisfaction. "The categories are as follows." He kept on doubling over his fat fingers, although the case before him and the categories, it was plain enough, could not be classified together. "Physical incapacity of husband or wife. Then adultery of husband or wife." Then, as all his fingers were closed, he raised them all again, and proceeded. "This is the theoretical view, but I think that, in doing me the honor to consult me, you desire to know the practical side, do you not? And therefore, guiding myself by antecedents, it is my duty to inform you that as this case is neither one of physical defect nor absence of one of the parties, as I understand?" Alexey Alexandrovitch bowed his head in confirmation of this. "The reason last named remains, adultery. And the conviction of the guilty party by mutual consent, and without mutual consent, compulsory conviction. I must say that the last case is rarely met with in practice," said the lawyer, and he glanced at his client and waited, like a gunsmith who explains to a purchaser the use of 2 pistols of different caliber, leaving him free to choose between them. But Alexey Alexandrovitch remaining silent, he continued. "The commonest, simplest, and most reasonable way, in my opinion, is to recognize the guilt by mutual agreement. I should not allow myself to say this if I were talking to a man of less experience than yourself," said the lawyer, "but I suppose that this is comprehensible to you." Alexey Alexandrovitch, however, was so troubled that he did not at the first moment realize the reasonableness of adultery by mutual agreement, and this uncertainty was to be read in his eyes, but the lawyer came at once to his aid. "Suppose that a man and wife can no longer live together. If both consent to a divorce, the details and formalities amount to nothing. This is the simplest and surest way." Alexey Alexandrovitch understood now, but he had religious convictions which stood in the way of his employing this measure. "In the present case, this means is out of the question," said he. "Here only one case is possible, compulsory conviction, supported by letters which are in my possession." At the mention of letters, the lawyer, pressing his lips together, uttered an exclamation both of pity and disdain. "Please take notice," he began. "Affairs of this sort are, as you well know, decided by the upper clergy," he said. "Our fathers the protopopes are great connoisseurs in affairs of this kind, and attend to the minutest details," said he, with a smile which showed his sympathy for the protopopes. "Letters undoubtedly might serve as partial evidence, but proofs must be furnished in the right way, by witnesses. However, if you do me the honor to grant me your confidence, you must give me the choice of measures to be pursued. Where there is a will, there is a way." "If that is so," began Alexey Alexandrovitch, suddenly growing very pale. But at that instant the lawyer again ran to the door to reply to a fresh interruption from the clerk. "Tell her then that this is not a cheap shop," said he, and returned to Alexey Alexandrovitch. As he returned to his place, he caught another moth. "My reps will be in a fine condition by summer," he said to himself, scowling. "You were kind enough to say—" "I will communicate to you my decision by letter," replied Alexey Alexandrovitch, standing up and leaning his hand on the table. After standing for a moment in thought, he said, "From your words I conclude that a divorce is possible. I shall be obliged to you if you will make your conditions known to me." "Everything is possible if you will give me entire freedom of action," said the lawyer, eluding the last question. "When may I expect a communication from you?" asked he, moving to the door with eyes as shiny as his boots. "Within a week. You will then have the goodness to let me know whether you accept the case, and on what terms?" "Very good." The lawyer bowed respectfully, conducted his client to the door, and when he was left alone, he gave vent to his feelings of joy. He felt so gay that, contrary to his principles, he made a deduction to a lady skilled in the art of making a bargain, and neglected to catch a moth, resolving definitely that he would have his furniture upholstered the next winter with velvet, as Segonin had. Alexey Alexandrovitch had won a brilliant victory at the session of the Commission of August 29, but the consequences of his victory were injurious to him. The new committee appointed to study the situation of the foreign population had been constituted, and had gone to its field of action with a promptness and energy surprising to Alexey Alexandrovitch. At the end of 3 months it presented its report. The condition of this population had been studied from a political, administrative, economical, ethnographical, material, and religious point of view. Each question was followed by an admirably concise reply, leaving no room to doubt that these answers were the work, not of a human mind, always liable to mistake, but of an experienced bureaucracy. These answers were based on official data, such as the reports of governors and archbishops, based again on the reports of heads of districts and ecclesiastical superintendents, in their turn based on the reports from communal administrations and country priests, and therefore their correctness could not be doubted. Questions such as these, "Why are the harvests poor?" and "Why do the inhabitants of certain localities persist in their beliefs?" and the like, questions which without the help of the official machine could never be solved, and to which ages would not have found a reply, were clearly solved in conformity with the opinions of Alexey Alexandrovitch. But Stremov, feeling that he had been touched to the quick at the last session, had employed for the reception of the committee's report a stratagem unexpected by Alexey Alexandrovitch. Taking with him several other members, he suddenly went over to Karenin's side, and, not satisfied with warmly supporting the measures proposed by Alexey Alexandrovitch, he proposed others of the same nature. These measures, which were of such a radical nature as to be entirely opposed to Alexey Alexandrovitch's intention, were adopted, and then Stremov's tactics were revealed. Carried to extremes, these measures seemed so ridiculous that the government officials, and public opinion, and ladies of influence, and the daily papers, all attacked them and expressed the greatest indignation both at the measures themselves and at their avowed promoter, Alexey Alexandrovitch. Stremov slipped out of sight, pretending that he only blindly followed Karenin's plan, and that he himself was amazed and dumbfounded at what had happened. This greatly weakened Alexey Alexandrovitch, but notwithstanding his enfeebled health, notwithstanding his family annoyances, he did not give up. The committee was split into 2 factions. Some of them, with Stremov at their head, explained their mistake by the fact that they had placed full confidence in the revisionary committee which, under the lead of Alexey Alexandrovitch, had brought in its report, and they declared the report of this committee of inspection was rubbish and so much wasted paper. Alexey Alexandrovitch, with a party of men who saw the peril of such a revolutionary reference to documents, continued to support the data worked out by the revisionary committee. As a result of this, the highest circles, and even society, was thrown into confusion, and always this was a question of the greatest interest to everyone. No one could make out whether the foreign populations were in reality suffering and dying out, or flourishing. Karenin's position in consequence of this, and partly in consequence of the contempt which people felt for him by reason of his wife's unfaithfulness, became very precarious. In this state of affairs he made an important resolution. To the great astonishment of the commission, he announced that he demanded the right to go and study these questions himself on the spot, and, permission having been granted him, Alexey Alexandrovitch set out for the distant provinces. His departure made a great sensation, especially from the fact that, at his very departure, he officially refused the travelling expenses required for 12 post-horses to take him to the places of inspection. "I think that was very noble of him," said Betsy to the Princess Myakaya. "Why should they pay for post-horses, when everyone knows that you can go everywhere nowadays by rail?" But the Princess Myakaya did not agree with her, and she was greatly wrought up by the Princess Tverskaya's remark. "This is very well for you to say," she replied, "when you have I don't know how many millions. But I like it very much when my husband goes off on a tour of inspection in the summer. It is very healthy and agreeable for him to go driving about, but I have made it a rule to keep that money for my own horse hire and isvostchiks." On his way to the distant provinces, Alexey Alexandrovitch stopped at Moscow 3 days. The next day after his arrival, he was coming from a call on the Governor General. At the crossing of the Gazetnoye Street, where carriages of every description are always thronging, he heard his name called in such a gay, sonorous voice that he could not help stopping. There stood Stepan Arkadyevitch on the sidewalk, in a short, stylish paletot, with a stylish hat set on one side, with a radiant smile which showed his white teeth between his red lips, gay, youthful looking, brilliant. He kept calling to him, and beckoning to him to stop. He was holding by one hand to the window of a carriage which had drawn up to the sidewalk, and in the carriage was a woman in a velvet hat, with 2 little ones. She also beckoned to him and smiled. It was Dolly and her children. Alexey Alexandrovitch had not counted on seeing in Moscow anyone whom he knew, and least of all his wife's brother. He took off his hat and would have proceeded, but Stepan Arkadyevitch motioned to the coachman to stop, and ran through the snow to the carriage. "How long have you been here? What a sin not to let us know you were coming! I was at Dussots last evening, and saw the name of Karenin on the list of arrivals, but it never occurred to me that it was you, else I should have looked you up," said he, passing his head through the door. "How glad I am to see you," he went on to say, striking his feet together to shake off the snow. "What a sin not to let us know!" "I hadn't time. I am very busy," replied Alexey Alexandrovitch curtly. "Come and speak to my wife. She wants to see you very much." Alexey Alexandrovitch threw off the plaid which covered his chilly limbs, and, leaving his carriage, made away through the snow to Darya Alexandrovna. "Why, what has happened, Alexey Alexandrovitch, that you avoid us in this way?" said she, smiling. "I was very busy. I am delighted to see you," replied Karenin, in a tone which clearly proved that he was annoyed. "How is your health?" "How is my dear Anna?" Alexey Alexandrovitch muttered a few words, and was about to leave her, but Stepan Arkadyevitch detained him. "Do you know what we are going to do tomorrow? Dolly, invite him to dinner. Have Koznyshev and Pestov, so as to regale him with the representative intellects of Moscow." "Oh, please come," said Dolly. "We will name any hour that is convenient, 5 or 6, as you please. But how is my dear Anna? It is so long." "She is well," muttered Alexey Alexandrovitch, again frowning. "Very happy to have met you." And he went back to his carriage. "Will you come?" cried Dolly again. Alexey Alexandrovitch said something in reply which Dolly could not hear in the rumble of carriages. "I am coming to see you tomorrow," cried Stepan Arkadyevitch. Alexey Alexandrovitch shut himself up in his carriage, and crouched down in one corner so as not to see and not to be seen. "What a strange fellow!" said Stepan Arkadyevitch to his wife, and looking at his watch he made an affectionate sign of farewell to his wife and children, and started off down the sidewalk at a brisk pace. "Stiva! Stiva!" cried Dolly, blushing. He came back. "I must have some money for the children's cloaks. Give me some." "No matter about that. Tell them that I will settle the bill." And he disappeared, gaily nodding to some acquaintance as he went. The next day was Sunday, and Stepan Arkadyevitch went to the Bolshoi, or Great Theatre, to attend the rehearsal of the ballet, and give the coral necklace to Masha Tchipisobaya, the pretty dancing girl who was making her début under his protection, and as he had promised the day before, and behind the scenes in the dim twilight of the theatre, he seized his opportunity, and kissed her pretty little face glowing with pleasure at his gift. Besides fulfilling his promise as to the coral necklace, he wanted to arrange with her for an assignation after the ballet. Having explained to her that he could not possibly manage to be present at the beginning of the ballet, he promised to come for the next act and take her out for supper. From the theatre, Stepan Arkadyevitch went to the Okhotnoy Ryad, himself selected a fish and asparagus for the dinner, and at noon he went to Dussots, where 3 travelers, friends of his, by happy chance were stopping. Levin, just returned from his journey abroad, his new nachalnik, or chief, who had just been appointed and had come to Moscow to look into affairs, and lastly, his brother-in-law, Karenin, whom he was bound to invite to dinner. Stepan Arkadyevitch liked to go out to dinner, but what he liked better still was to give a choice little dinner party with a few select friends. The program that he made out for this day pleased him: fresh perch, with asparagus, and a simple but superb roast of beef, as pièce de résistance, and the right kinds of wine. Among the guests he expected Kitty and Levin, and, to offset them, a cousin and the young Shtcherbatsky. The pièce de résistance among the guests were to be Sergei Koznoi-Shev, a Muscovite and philosopher, and Karenin, a Petersburger and a man of affairs. Moreover, he would invite the well-known Pestov, a comical fellow, a youth of 50 years, an enthusiast, a musician, a ready talker, a historian and a liberal, who would be the sauce or garnish for Koznoi-Shev and Alexey Alexandrovitch. He would put everyone in good spirits and stir them up. The second installment of money from the sale of the wood had been recently received, and was not all gone. Dolly for some time had been lovely and charming, and the thought of this dinner in every respect delighted Stepan Arkadyevitch. He was in the happiest frame of mind. There were 2 things which were rather disagreeable, but these 2 circumstances were drowned in the sea of joviality which rolled its billows in Stepan Arkadyevitch's soul. These 2 circumstances were, in the first place, when the evening before he had met Alexey Alexandrovitch on the street, he had perceived that he was stern and cold, and uniting the fact that Alexey Alexandrovitch had not called or sent word of his presence with certain rumors that had reached his ears about his sister's relations with Vronsky, Stepan Arkadyevitch suspected serious trouble between the husband and wife. This was one unpleasant thing. The second slight shadow was the fact that the new nachalnik, like all new chiefs, had the reputation of being a terribly exacting man, who got up at 6 o'clock, worked like a horse, and demanded similar zeal from his subordinates. Moreover, this new nachalnik had the reputation of being a regular bear in his manners, and was, according to rumor, a man of the opposite party from that to which his predecessor had belonged, and to which Stepan Arkadyevitch himself had up to that time also belonged. The afternoon before, Stepan Arkadyevitch had appeared at the office in full uniform, and the new nachalnik had been very cordial, and had talked with Oblonsky as with an old friend. Consequently, he thought it his duty to pay him an unofficial visit. The thought that the new nachalnik might not receive him cordially was a second disturbing element. But Stepan Arkadyevitch felt instinctively that all would be arranged to perfection. All people, all men, are transgressors as well as we. Why get angry and quarrel? He said to himself as he went to the hotel. "How are you, Vasily?" said he, as he went through the corridor with his hat cocked on one side, and met a lackey of his acquaintance. "Have you sacrificed your whiskers? Levin? In number 7. Please show me. Thanks. Do you know, is Count Anichkin at home?" This was the new nachalnik. "At your service," said Vasily with a smile. "We have not seen you for a long time." I was here yesterday, but came up another stairway. Is this number 7? When Stepan Arkadyevitch entered, Levin was standing in the middle of his room with a muzhik from Tver measuring a bearskin. "Ah, did you kill him?" cried Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Splendid skin! A bear! How are you, Arkhip?" He held out his hand to the peasant, and then sat down in his paletot and hat. "Take off your coat and stay a while," said Levin, taking his hat. "I haven't time. I only came in for a little second," replied Oblonsky. He unbuttoned his paletot, then took it off and stayed a whole hour to talk with Levin about the hunt and other subjects. "Well now, tell me, please, what you did while you were abroad. Where have you been?" he asked after the peasant had gone. "I went to Germany, to France, and England, but only to the manufacturing centres, and not to the capitals. I saw a great deal that was new. I am glad I went." Yes, I know your ideas about organized labor." "Oh, no. In Russia there can be no labor question. The question of the working man doesn't concern us. The only important question for Russia is the relation of the workman to the soil. The question exists there, but it is impossible to remedy it there. While here—" Oblonsky listened attentively. Yes, said he. "It is possible that you are right, but I am glad that you are in better spirits. You hunt the bear, you work, you are enthusiastic. Shtcherbatsky told me that he had found you blue and melancholy, talking of nothing but death." "What of that? I am continually thinking of death," replied Levin. "It's true that there is a time to die, and that all is vanity. But I will tell you honestly, I set great value on my thought and work. But think of this world, just take notice, this world of ours, a little mold making the smallest of the planets, and we imagine that our ideas, our works, are something grand. It's all grains of dust." "All that is as old as the hills, brother." "It is old. But you see when this idea becomes clear to us, how miserable life seems. When we know that death will surely come, and that there will be nothing left of us, the most important things seem as insignificant as the turning over of this bearskin. And so in order to keep away thoughts of death, we hunt and work and try to divert ourselves." Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled, and gave Levin one of his affectionate looks. "Well, of course. Here you come to me, and you pounce on me because I seek pleasure in life. Be not so severe, O moralist." "All the same, there is some good in life," replied Levin, becoming confused. "Well, I don't know. I only know that we must soon die." "Why soon?" "And you know that there is less charm in life when we think of death, but more restfulness." "On the contrary, we must enjoy what there is of it, anyway. But," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, rising for the 10th time, "I must go." "Oh, no, stay a little longer," said Levin, holding him back. "When shall we see each other again? I leave tomorrow." "I am a queer fellow. This is what I came for. Don't fail to come and dine with us today. Your brother will be with us, and my brother-in-law, Karenina, will be there." "Is he here?" asked Levin, and he wanted to ask about Kitty. He had heard that she had been in Petersburg at the beginning of the winter, visiting her sister, the wife of a diplomatist, and he did not know whether she had returned or not, but he hesitated about asking. "Whether she has come back or not, it's all the same. I will accept," he thought. "Will you come?" "Well, of course I will." "At 5 o'clock, in ordinary dress." And Stepan Arkadyevitch rose and went down to see the new nachalnik. Instinct had not deceived him. This dreadful man proved to be a great fellow. Stepan Arkadyevitch lunched with him, and stayed so long to talk that it was nearly 4 o'clock when he got to Alexey Alexandrovitch's room. Alexey Alexandrovitch, after he returned from mass, spent the morning in his room. He had 2 things to accomplish on this day. First, to receive a deputation of the foreign population, which was on its way to Petersburg, and happened just at that time to be at Moscow, and he wanted to instruct them as to what they should say. And then to write to his lawyer, as he had promised. The deputation, although it had been appointed at Alexey Alexandrovitch's invitation, was likely to cause great embarrassment, and even to be a source of peril, and Alexey Alexandrovitch was very glad to meet it in Moscow. The members of the deputation had not the slightest comprehension of their duties and obligations. They were perfectly persuaded that their work consisted in exposing their needs and explaining the actual state of affairs and asking governmental assistance. And they really could not comprehend that some of their statements and demands gave color to the arguments of the hostile party and therefore spoiled the whole business. Alexey Alexandrovitch had a long discussion with them, made out a program from which they were not to deviate on any account in their dealings with the government, and, when they left him, gave them letters of introduction to various persons in Petersburg so that they might be properly treated. The Countess Lidia Ivanovna would be his principal auxiliary in this matter. She had a specialty for deputations, and knew better than anybody else how to manage them. When he had finished this business, Alexey Alexandrovitch wrote to his lawyer. Without the slightest misgiving, he gave him full power to do as he thought best, and sent 3 notes from Vronsky to Anna, which he had found in the portfolio. Since Alexey Alexandrovitch had left home with the intention of never returning to his family, and since his interview with the lawyer, when he had confided to one person at least his intentions, and especially since he had transferred this episode of his life to a documentary basis, he had become more and more settled in his convictions, and was now perfectly clear in his mind that what he wished could be accomplished. Just as he was sealing his letter, he heard Stepan Arkadyevitch's loud voice asking the servant if his brother-in-law was at home, and insisting on being announced. "It's all the same," thought Alexey Alexandrovitch, "or rather, so much the better. I will explain to him my position in regard to his sister, and he will understand that it is impossible for me to dine at his house. Come in," he cried, gathering up his papers and pushing them into a writing-case. "There now, you see you lied, and he is at home," said Stepan Arkadyevitch to the servant, who would not let him in. Then, taking off his overcoat, as he walked along, he came to Alexey Alexandrovitch's room. "I am delighted to find you," he began gaily. "I hope—" "I cannot go," said Alexey Alexandrovitch coldly, receiving his brother-in-law standing, and not asking him to sit down. Alexey Alexandrovitch resolved to adopt with his wife's brother the cool relations which seemed proper since he had decided to get a divorce. But he did not reckon on that sea of kind-heartedness which was always overflowing its banks in Stepan Arkadyevitch's heart. Stepan Arkadyevitch opened wide his bright, clear eyes. "Why can't you come? What do you mean?" he asked in French with some hesitation. "But you promised to come, and we all are counting on you." "I wish to tell you that I cannot come because our family relations must be broken." "How is that? Why?" said Oblonsky with a smile. "Because I have commenced an action for getting a divorce from my wife, your sister. I must—" But Alexey Alexandrovitch did not finish his sentence, for Stepan Arkadyevitch acted in a manner quite contrary to his expectations. Stepan Arkadyevitch sank into an armchair with a deep sigh. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, it can't be possible!" he cried, with pain expressed in his face. "It is true." "Pardon me, I cannot believe it." Alexey Alexandrovitch sat down. He felt that his words had not produced the effect that he had looked for, and that whatever explanation he might make, his relations with Oblonsky would remain the same. "Yes, it is a cruel necessity, but I am forced to demand the divorce," he replied. "I will say only one thing to you, Alexey Alexandrovitch. I know that you are a man of principle, and I know Anna is one of the best of women. Excuse me if I cannot change my opinion of her. I cannot believe it. There must be some misunderstanding." "Yes, if it were only a misunderstanding." "Excuse me, I understand. But I beg of you, do not be in haste," interrupted Stepan Arkadyevitch. "I have done nothing hastily," said Alexey Alexandrovitch coldly. "But in such a case one cannot ask advice of anybody. I am decided." "This is terrible!" exclaimed Stepan Arkadyevitch with a deep sigh. "I would do one thing, Alexey Alexandrovitch. I beseech you to do this," said he. "Proceedings, as I understand, have not yet begun. Before you do anything, talk with my wife. She loves Anna like a sister. She loves you, and she is a woman of good sense. For God's sake, talk with her. Do me this favor, I beg of you." Alexey Alexandrovitch deliberated, and Stepan Arkadyevitch looked at him sympathetically, not breaking in on his silence. "Will you come to her?" "Well, I don't know. That is the reason I did not call at your house. I suppose our relations ought to be broken off." "Why should they be? I don't see that. Allow me to believe that apart from our family connection, you have toward me, to a certain extent at least, the same friendly sentiments which I have always felt toward you, and genuine regard," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pressing his hand. "Even if your worst surmises were justified, I should never take it on myself to criticize either side, and I see no reason why our relations should be changed. But now do this. Come and see my wife." "Well, you and I look on this matter differently," said Alexey Alexandrovitch coldly. "However, we will not discuss it." "No, but why should you not come and dine with us, at least today? My wife expects you. Please come, and above all talk with her. She is, I assure you, a superior woman. For God's sake come, I beg you on my knees." "If you wish it so much, I will go," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, sighing. And to change the conversation, he asked Stepan Arkadyevitch about a matter which interested them both, about the new nachalnik, a man still young, who had suddenly received such an important appointment. Alexey Alexandrovitch had never liked Count Anitchkin, and had always differed with him about many questions. And now he could not help a feeling of envy natural to an official who had suffered defeat in his work and saw a younger man receiving advancement. "Well, have you met him yet?" asked Alexey Alexandrovitch with a venomous smile. "Oh, yes, he was with us yesterday at the session. He seems like a man very well informed and very active." "Active? But how does he employ his activity?" exclaimed Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Is it in doing his work, or in destroying what others have done before him? The plague of our government is this scribbling bureaucracy, of which Anitchkin is a worthy representative." "Truly, I don't know how this criticism applies to him. I don't even know his tendencies. At any rate, he is a very good fellow," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch. "I have just been with him. A very good fellow. We lunched together, and I taught him how to make a drink, you know, wine and oranges. He liked it very much. No, he is a fine young man." Stepan Arkadyevitch looked at his watch. "Ah, Batoishki, it is after 4 o'clock, and I have still to see Dolgovushin. It is decided, then, that you will dine with us, isn't it? Both my wife and myself will feel really hurt if you refuse to come." Alexey Alexandrovitch took leave of his brother-in-law very differently from the way in which he had greeted him. "I have promised, and I will come," he replied in a melancholy tone. "Believe me, I appreciate it, and I hope you will not regret it," said Stepan Arkadyevitch with a smile. And putting on his overcoat in the hall, he shook his fist at the servant's head, laughed, and went out. "At 5 o'clock, remember, and in ordinary dress," he called back once more, returning to the door. It was already 6 o'clock, and several guests had come when the master of the house entered, meeting Sergey Ivanovitch Koznuishev and Pestov at the door. These were the two chief representatives of Moscow intellect, as Vronsky had called them, and were men of distinction both by wit and character. They valued each other, but on almost every topic were absolutely and hopelessly at odds, not because they belonged to opposing parties, but precisely because they were of the same camp. Their enemies confounded them in one, but in this camp they each had their shades of opinion. Now there is nothing more conducive to disagreement than dissent in small particulars, and so they not only never agreed in their opinions, but never failed to laugh at each other good-naturedly for their incorrigible mistakes. They reached the door, talking about the weather, just as Stepan Arkadyevitch overtook them. The old prince, Alexander Dmitrievitch Shtcherbatsky, young Shtcherbatsky, Turovtsin, Kitty, and Karenina were already in the drawing-room. Stepan Arkadyevitch instantly perceived that matters in the drawing-room were going badly without him. Darya Alexandrovna, in her best gray silk gown, especially preoccupied with the children, who should have been eating their supper in the nursery by themselves, and anxious because her husband was late, did not succeed very well in entertaining her guests. All were sitting like a pope's daughters making a call, as the old prince expressed it, evidently perplexed to know why they had come, and with difficulty finding a few words so that the silence might not be absolute. The good-natured Turovtsin apparently felt out of his sphere, and the smile on his thick lips when he greeted Stepan Arkadyevitch spoke louder than words. "Well, my dear fellow, you have got me here with clever people. We are making merry here. It is a regular château de fleurs. I am doing my part." The old prince was sitting in silence looking out of the corner of his bright eyes at Stepan Arkadyevitch, and Stepan Arkadyevitch perceived that he was trying to think up something worth saying to make an impression on this great statesman who was being served up like a sterlet for the benefit of the guests. Kitty kept glancing at the door, trying with all her might not to be caught blushing when Konstantin Levin should appear. Young Shtcherbatsky, who had not been presented to Karenin, was trying to show that this did not cause him any constraint. Karenin himself was in a black coat and white necktie, according to the Petersburg custom, and Stepan Arkadyevitch perceived by his face that he had come only to keep his promise, and by mingling in the society was performing a burdensome task. He, more than any one else, was the cause of the chill which froze all the guests into silence until Stepan Arkadyevitch made his appearance. As soon as Stepan Arkadyevitch entered the drawing-room, he made his excuses, and explained that he had been detained by a certain prince who was always his scapegoat for all his delays and absences. In a twinkling he presented his guests to one another, furnished Koznuishev and Karenin a subject of conversation, the Russification of Poland, which they instantly grappled with, also enlisting Pestov in the discussion. Then, tapping Turovtsin on the shoulder, he whispered some jest into his ear, and sat him down between his wife and Prince Shtcherbatsky. Then he complimented Kitty on her beauty, and introduced young Shtcherbatsky to Karenin. In a twinkling he had so worked on all this mass of social dough that it began to seem like a salon, and the voices intermingled in gay confusion. Konstantin Levin was the only guest not on hand. But even this was a fortunate circumstance, because when Stepan Arkadyevitch went into the dining-room, he discovered to his dismay that the port and sherry had come from Desprez, and not from Levy, and he seized the opportunity to send the coachman in all haste to Levy's, and then he returned to the drawing-room. Levin met him at the door of the drawing-room. "I am not late, am I?" "How could you be?" replied Stepan Arkadyevitch, taking him by the arm. "Are there many people here? Who are they?" asked Levin, blushing involuntarily, and with his glove brushing away the snow from his hat. "No one but relatives. Kitty is here. Come, let me present you to Karenin." Stepan Arkadyevitch, notwithstanding his liberal views, knew that a presentation to Karenin could not fail to be flattering, and therefore he regaled his best friends with this pleasure. But at this moment Konstantin Levin was not in a condition to appreciate all the satisfaction which this acquaintance would afford. He had not seen Kitty since that well-remembered evening when he met Vronsky, except for that glimpse of her which he had as she sat in her carriage. In the depth of his heart he knew that he was to see her this evening, but in his attempt to preserve all the freedom of his thoughts, he had tried to persuade himself that he did not know it. And now, as he learned that she was there, he suddenly felt such timidity and at the same time such terror that he could hardly breathe, and he found it impossible to say what he wanted to say. How will she seem? Just as she used to? Suppose Darya Alexandrovna was right. Why wasn't she right? He thought. "Oh, present me to Karenin, I beg of you," he succeeded in stammering, as he entered the drawing-room with the courage of despair, and saw her. She was neither as she had been in old time, nor as she had been in the carriage. She was altogether different. She was nervous, timid, modest, and therefore even more charming than ever. She saw him the moment he entered the drawing-room. She had been watching for him, and she felt so glad and so confused by reason of her gladness that at one moment especially when, after greeting Dolly, he looked at her, she was afraid of bursting into tears. Levin and Dolly both noticed it. She blushed and turned pale, and blushed again. She was so agitated that her lips trembled. Levin approached her and bowed, and silently offered his hand. Had it not been for the slight trembling of her lips and the moisture that suffused her eyes and increased their brilliancy, her smile would have been almost serene as she said, "How long it is since we have met!" and at the same time with a sort of desperate resolution put her cold hand into his. "You have not seen me, but I saw you one day," said Levin, with a smile of radiant happiness. "I saw you when you were going from the railway station to Yergoshovo." "When was it?" asked she, in surprise. "You were on your way to Yergoshovo," said Levin, feeling that the joy which flooded his soul was suffocating him. How, he thought, could I have dared to associate anything but innocence with this fascinating creature? Yes, Darya Alexandrovna was right. Stepan Arkadyevitch came to conduct him to Karenin. "Allow me to make you acquainted," said he, calling each by name. "It is very pleasant to meet you again," said Alexey Alexandrovitch coolly, as he shook Levin's hand. "What, do you already know each other?" asked Oblonsky with surprise. "We traveled together for 3 hours," said Levin, smiling, "but we parted as from a masked ball, very much mystified. At least, it was the case with me." "Really? Will you pass into the dining room?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pointing toward the door. The gentleman walked into the dining room, and went to a table laden with the zakuska, which was composed of 6 kinds of vodka, as many varieties of cheese with silver shovels, and without, caviar, herring, preserves of different kinds, and platefuls of French bread sliced thin. The men stood around the table, and, while waiting for the dinner, the conversation between Sergey Ivanovitch, Kozneushchev, Karenin, and Pestov about the Russification of Poland began to languish. Sergey Ivanovitch, who had a faculty peculiar to himself for ending even the most absorbing and serious dispute, by an unexpected infusion of Attic salt, and so putting the disputants into a better frame of mind, did this now. Alexey Alexandrovitch was trying to prove that the Russification of Poland could be accomplished only by means of the highest principles, and that these ought to be introduced by the Russian administration. Pestov maintained that one nation could only assimilate another by surpassing it in density of population. Kozneushchev, with certain restrictions, shared the opinions of both, and to close this serious conversation with a joke, he added as they left the drawing-room, smiling, "The most logical way, then, for us to assimilate foreigners, it seems to me, is to have as many children as possible. It is there where my brother and I are in fault, while you married gentlemen, and especially you, Stepan Arkadyevitch, are acting the part of good patriots. How many have you?" he asked of the host, handing him a very diminutive glass. Everybody laughed, and Oblonsky most of all. "Yes, that is certainly the best means," said he, taking a bite of cheese and pouring some special kind of vodka into the glass that Kozneushchev offered him. But the jest really served to bring the discussion to a close. "This cheese is not bad. What do you say?" remarked the host. "Do you still practice gymnastics?" said Oblonsky, addressing Levin, and with his left hand feeling his friend's muscles. Levin smiled and doubled up his arm, and Stepan Arkadyevitch felt how under his fingers the biceps swelled up like a round cheese beneath the smooth cloth of his coat. "What biceps! A Samson!" said he. "I suppose it is necessary to be endowed with remarkable strength to hunt bears, isn't it?" said Alexey Alexandrovitch, smearing some cheese on a piece of bread as thin as a cobweb. His ideas about hunting were of the vaguest. Levin smiled. "No, on the contrary, a child could kill a bear." And he drew back with a slight bow to make room for the ladies, who with the hostess were coming to the zakuska table. "I hear that you have just killed a bear," said Kitty, vainly trying to put her fork into a recalcitrant mushroom which kept flying about the plate, and as she threw back the lace in her sleeve there was a glimpse of a white arm. "Are there really bears where you live?" she added, half turning her pretty face toward him and smiling. What she said had no especial importance, but what significance inexpressible in words there was for him in the sound of her voice, in every motion of her lips, of her eyes, hands, when she said it. It implied an entreaty for forgiveness, an expression of faith in him, a sweet and timid caress, and a promise, and a hope, and love for him, and he could not help believing in it, and his heart was filled with happiness. "Oh, no, we were hunting in the government at Tver, and on my way from there I met your brother-in-law, Stiva's brother-in-law, in the train," said he, smiling. "The meeting was very funny." And he gave a lively and amusing description of how, after having been awake all night, he forced his way into Karenin's car in a sheepskin jacket. "The conductor, contrary to the proverb, judging by first impressions, wanted to put me out, and there I was beginning to express myself in sublime style, and well, sir, you also," said he, addressing Karenin and not recollecting his name. "You got your first impression from my Polushka book, and were for expelling me, but afterward you took my part, for which I felt very grateful to you." "Travellers' rights to their choice of place are generally too little considered," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, wiping the ends of his fingers with his napkin. "Oh, I noticed that you were dubious about me," replied Levin, smiling good-naturedly. "That was why I hastened to open a serious subject of conversation, to make you forget my sheepskin." Kosnuishev, who was talking with the mistress of the house, and at the same time listening with one ear to what his brother said, glanced at him. "What is the matter with him tonight? What makes him look so triumphant?" he asked himself. He did not know Levin felt as if he had wings. Levin knew that she was listening to him. She was taking pleasure in what he said, and this was the only thing that interested him. He was alone with her, not only in this room, but in the whole world. He felt that he was on a dizzy height, and there far below him were all these excellent people, Oblonsky, Karenin, and the rest of humanity. Stepan Arkadyevitch seemed entirely to forget Levin and Kitty in placing his guests at table until all but 2 of the seats were assigned. Then he put them side by side. "Well, you can sit there," he said to Levin. The dinner was as elegant as the appointments, for Stepan Arkadyevitch was a great connoisseur in such matters. The Marie Louise soup was perfect. The little pierogi or pasties which melted in the mouth were irreproachable. And Matva, with 2 waiters in white cravats, skillfully and noiselessly served the roast and the wine. On the material side the dinner was a success. It was not less so on the non-material side. The conversation was sometimes general, sometimes special, but it never lagged, and toward the end of the dinner it had grown so animated that when they left the table the men could not drop their interesting topics, and even Alexey Alexandrovitch was thawed out. Pestov, who liked to discuss a question thoroughly, was not satisfied with what Kosnuishev had said. He felt that he had not been allowed to express his thoughts sufficiently. "In speaking of the density of the population," said he, after the soup, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch, "I didn't intend to make it the principle of an assimilation, but only a means." "It seems to me that amounts to the same thing," replied Karenin, slowly and indolently. "In my judgment, a people can have no influence over another people, unless it has the highest development, which—" "That is precisely the question," interrupted Pestov, who always spoke with so much ardor that he seemed to put his whole soul into defending his own opinions. "How is one to decide on what is the highest development? Which stands on the highest plane of civilization, the English, the French, or the Germans? Which nation is to naturalize the others? We have seen the Rhine made French, but are the Germans inferior? No, there is some other law," he cried in his bass voice. "I believe that the balance will always turn in favor of true civilization," said Alexey Alexandrovitch, slightly raising his brows. "But what are the signs of this true civilization?" demanded Pestov. "I suppose these signs are known," replied Alexey Alexandrovitch. "But are they really known?" suggested Sergey Ivanovitch, with a subtle smile. "It is now admitted that our present civilization can't be anything else than classical. But we have furious debates on this point, and it cannot be denied that each side brings forward strong proofs in its favor." "Are you in favor of the classics, Sergey Ivanovitch?" said Oblonsky. "Shall I give you some claret?" "I am not expressing my personal opinions regarding either form of civilization," replied Kosnuishev, with a smile of condescension such as he would have shown a child, as he reached out his glass. "I only say that both sides have strong arguments, continued he, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch. "My education was classical, but in this controversy I personally cannot find any room to stand. I do not see any clear proofs that the classics must take precedence over the sciences." "The natural sciences tend just as much to the pedagogical development of the human mind," replied Pestsov. "Take astronomy, take botany, and zoology, each with its system of general laws." "It seems to me impossible to deny that the very process of learning the forms of languages has a specially beneficial influence on mental development. Moreover, it must be admitted that the influence of the classic writers is eminently moral, while, unfortunately for us, the study of the natural sciences has been complicated with false and fatal doctrines, which are the bane of our time." Sergey Ivanovitch was going to reply, but Pestsov interrupted him in his deep voice. He began heatedly to demonstrate the incorrectness of this statement. Kosnuishev calmly waited his chance to speak, evidently feeling that it would be a victorious rejoinder. "But," said he, smiling shrewdly, and addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch, "it cannot be denied that it is a difficult matter completely to balance all the advantages and disadvantages of the two systems of science, and that the question which is preferable could not be decided so quickly and definitely if there were not on the side of the classical civilization that advantage which you just called the moral, de sens l'homme, the anti-nihilistic influence." "Undoubtedly." "If it were not for this advantage of the anti-nihilistic influence welded by classic education, we should rather hesitate. We should weigh the arguments of both sides," said Sergey Ivanovitch with his shrewd smile. "We should give scope to both tendencies. But now we know that in classical education lies the medical power of anti-nihilism, and we boldly administer it like a pill to our patients. But are we perfectly sure of the healing properties of these pills?" he said in conclusion, pouring out his Attic salt. Sergey Ivanovitch's pills made everyone laugh. Turovtsin more boisterously and heartily than the rest, for he had been on the lookout for something amusing to laugh at ever since the conversation began. Stepan Arkadyevitch had made no mistake in counting on Pestsov. Pestsov never allowed an intellectual conversation to flag for a moment. Kosnuishev had hardly finished with his jest when Pestsov began again. "One cannot even agree with this idea," said he, "that morality has this aim. Morality is evidently controlled by general considerations and remains indifferent to the influences of the measures which may be taken. For example, the question of higher education for women should be regarded as dangerous, yet the government opens the public lectures and the universities to women." And the conversation immediately leaped to the new theme of the education of women. Alexey Alexandrovitch expressed the thought that the education of women was too much confused with the question of the emancipation of women, and could be considered dangerous only from that point of view. "I believe, on the contrary, that these two questions are intimately connected," said Pestsov. "It is a vicious circle. Woman is deprived of rights because she is deprived of education, and her lack of education comes from the absence of rights. Let us not forget that the bondage of women is so ancient, so interwoven with our customs, that we are very often incapable of understanding the legal abyss that separates her from us." "You speak of rights," said Sergey Ivanovitch, as soon as he had a chance to put in a word. "Is it a right to fulfill the functions of juror, of municipal councillor, of president of the tribunal, of public functionary, of member of parliament?" "Without a doubt." "But if women can exceptionally fill these functions, then it seems to me we make a mistake in using the word rights. It would be fairer to say duties. Everyone agrees that in fulfilling the function of a juror, of town councillor, of telegraph employer, we are fulfilling a duty. Let us say, then, that women are seeking for duties, and legitimately enough. In this case we may sympathize with their desire to take part in a man's work." "That is perfectly fair," affirmed Alexey Alexandrovitch. "The question, I suspect, consists in deciding whether they are capable of fulfilling these duties." "They will be, certainly, as soon as they have been generally educated," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "We see it." "And the proverb?" asked the old prince, whose little scornful eyes shone as he listened to this conversation. "I may repeat it before my daughters. Long hair." "That is the way we judge the negroes before their emancipation," said Pestsov with dissatisfaction. "What astonishes me," said Sergey Ivanovitch, "is that women are seeking new duties, when we see, unfortunately, that men generally shirk theirs." "Duties are accompanied by rights, honor, influence, money. These are what women are after," said Pestsov. "Exactly as if I solicited the right to become a wet nurse, and found it hard to be refused, while women are paid for it," said the old prince. Turovtsin burst out laughing, and Sergey Ivanovitch regretted that he had not said that. Even Alexey Alexandrovitch smiled. "Yes, but a man can't be a wet nurse," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "But a woman—" "But what is a young girl without any family going to do?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, who found reason to sympathize with Pestsov, as he thought of his little ballet girl, Chibisovaya. "If you look closely into the lives of these young girls," said Darya Alexandrovna, unexpectedly taking part in the conversation and showing some irritation, for it was evident that she suspected what sort of women Stepan Arkadyevitch meant, "you will doubtless find that they have left a family or a sister, and that women's work was within their reach." "But we are defending a principle, an ideal," answered Pestsov in his ringing bass. "Woman claims the right to be independent and educated. She suffers from her consciousness of being unable to accomplish this." "And I suffer from not being admitted as nurse to the foundling asylum," repeated the old prince, to the great amusement of Turovtsin, letting the large end of a piece of asparagus fall into his sauce.